low wind sweeping across open ground. The distant clank of tank tracks. A radio crackles with static. The ground east of Magdeburg was still frozen in places, the mud stiff enough to hold the weight of steel. Columns of armor moved slowly through the haze, engines growling, exhaust drifting low. Soviet crews sat tense inside their tanks, fingers numb, eyes scanning for threats that never came from where they expected. Captain Alexei Morozov stood half-exposed from the turret of a T-74, binoculars pressed to his face. He had survived Kursk, survived the long road west, survived German air attacks that turned columns into graveyards. He had learned to fear the sky, but only when it screamed. The sky was quiet, too quiet, he murmured. Inside the tanks, men smoked in silence, thinking of home, of letters unread, of how close the war felt to ending. Somewhere ahead, the front line shifted hour by hour. Orders were simple. Reposition captured German armor and Soviet units for a coordinated push at first light. Metal tracks ground against broken concrete. A loose road sign clattered under a tread. Then a sound drifted in faint at first, almost mistaken for distant machinery. Thump, thump, thump. A young lieutenant looked up from his map, frowning. Comrade Captain, do you hear that? Morozov lowered his binoculars. It wasn't the sharp howl of a dive bomber, not the sudden roar of fighters. The sound was steady. Circular. Unnerving, men climbed partially out of hatches, craning their necks. Above them, emerging from the mist, were ships few had ever seen clearly. Small American helicopters, hovering with an unnatural stillness, rotors beating the air like a mechanical heart. What is that? Someone whispered. Machine guns traversed upward. Fingers tightened on triggers, but the helicopters did not dive. They did not fire. They simply held position, drifting slightly, as if studying the ground. Inside one of them, Captain Robert Hayes adjusted his headset, eyes flicking between instruments and the moving armor below. Eagle Eye has visual, he said calmly into the radio. Confirming armored column. Counting, 2-4 vehicles. His voice was steady, professional, almost detached. Miles away, hidden behind tree lines and low hills, American artillery crews waited beside their guns, hands poised on elevation wheels. Hayes leaned forward, peering through observation optics, marking lead tank. Stand by for correction. On the ground, Morozov felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. They are not attacking, he said slowly. So why are they here? Then the earth answered. The first shell landed short, a towering column of dirt and fire. The shockwave slapped the tanks like a physical blow. What the? The second strike hit true. A tank vanished in a flash of orange, its turret lifting briefly before crashing back down, twisted and burning. Ammunition detonated inside, the sound sharp and final. Artillery. Someone screamed. Men scrambled inside their tanks. Engines revved. Tracks lurched forward. From above, the helicopters shifted slightly. Impact observed. Hayes reported. Adjust fire. Walk it right. Another shell. Then another. Explosions marched through the column with terrifying precision. Tanks burned without ever seeing the enemy. Crews bailed out into smoke and flame, some rolling on the ground, others collapsing before they took 3 steps. Soviet gunners fired upward blindly. Tracers streaked through empty sky. They're too far. A gunner shouted, we can't reach them. Morozov watched through smoke-streaked binoculars as a third tank erupted, its hull splitting open like torn paper. They are not killing us themselves, he realized aloud. They are guiding death. The helicopters hovered, indifferent to the chaos below, rotors beating steadily, radio chatter constant and precise. Correction complete. Fire for effect. The barrage intensified, steel screamed. Fuel burned. The frozen ground shook as if the war itself had chosen this place to make a final statement. Within minutes, the column was no longer a formation, only wreckage scattered across the field, black smoke rising into a sky that never once screamed. As suddenly as it began, the shelling stopped. Silence returned, broken only by crackling fires and the distant hum of rotors retreating into the clouds. Morozov lowered his binoculars, his hands shaking. Around him lay 24 destroyed tanks. Not one had fired a shot at its killer. Low winter wind across an open airfield. A distant propeller coughs to laugh, then steadies. The winter of 1943 pressed hard against the walls of a guarded hangar in Dayton, Ohio. Inside, under bare bolts and cigarette smoke, men stood around a shape that did not resemble any aircraft they had ever seen. It was sharp where it should have been smooth, flat where curves had ruled aviation for decades. An airplane built not to fly beautifully but to disappear. Captain Robert Hale traced a line of chalk across a blackboard filled with angles and equations. His voice was low, almost afraid of being overheard. If radar waves hit the surface, he said, tapping the board, they scatter away from the receiver. No echo. No return. Major Thomas Keegan listened without blinking. And if they don't? Hale swallowed. Then the Germans will see it long before we ever do. Chalk scraping. A clock ticking. The math wasn't American. Not entirely. It came from academic papers written before the war, studies on wave reflection published by Soviet scientists who had never imagined their work would be used to evade radar in a global conflict. The equations had crossed borders silently, passed through intelligence channels, refined by men who understood that the future of air combat might belong not to speed or altitude but invisibility thousands of miles away. Snow drifted against the windows of a Soviet research institute outside Moscow. Engineer Anatoly Morozov leaned closer to a dim desk lamp, rereading a captured German report. His fingers tightened around the pages. "This geometry," he murmured, "this is ours." A colleague frowned. "You think the Americans?" "I think," Morozov interrupted, "they believe the math." Back in Ohio, ground crew moved carefully around the aircraft. Sergeant Bill Navarro ran a gloved hand along one jagged panel and shook his head. "Looks like it was built by a drunk carpenter," he muttered. "You sure this thing won't just fall out of the sky?" Lieutenant Jack Mercer, the assigned test pilot, didn't answer right away. He stared at the cockpit, cramped, unfamiliar, wrapped in secrecy. He had flown bombers over occupied France. He had seen flak tear wings apart. "This plane," he finally said, "is either the safest thing I'll ever fly, or the last." Metal ladder clanks. Canopy closing. The test flight was scheduled after sunset. Radar stations along the California coast were warned only that an unidentified aircraft might pass through their coverage. They were told to report everything. The engine roared unevenly as Mercer lifted off, the aircraft resisting him like a stubborn animal. At altitude, the controls steadied, but the silence inside the cockpit felt unnatural. "Control," Mercer said into the radio, "I'm approaching the radar zone." Static answered. Then a calm voice. "Proceed." Below him, in darkened rooms filled with glowing green screens, radar operators leaned forward. "Any contact?" One asked, another shook his head slowly. "Nothing." "Sky's empty." At 30,000 feet, Mercer exhaled, his breath fogging the glass. "They can't see me," he whispered, half in awe, half in fear. News of the test never left the room. But soon, similar aircraft began flying over the Atlantic, slipping through gaps that German radar operators could not explain. Brief engine noise. No return signal. In Berlin, a Luftwaffe officer slammed his fist on a table. "Our equipment is flawless. Something is passing through and we are blind." On the Eastern Front, Soviet air defense units reported the same unsettling pattern. Morozov read the reports late at night, his stomach heavy. "They didn't steal our weapon," he said quietly. "They finished what we started." Low, distant thunder of war. As factories burned and armies clashed openly, something else moved above the battlefield, silent, unseen, built from fear, equations, and a belief that war could be fought from the shadows, and the sky, once crowded with death, began to hide its most dangerous secret.